I wanted to mention a question that I've gotten recently is, if I enter and I'm in the regional or youth category, does that mean I don't qualify for a top 4 spot? And that is not true. The first winners we choose are the top 4. So if you're a youth and a regional, you might win a regional prize, which somebody actually did last year. I think he entered in the youth category and won for a regional prize. So everybody is eligible for the top prizes. It's a real fun process we go through, and we look forward to it every year. I need to remind everybody, my cat's in the background, that the deadline is June 1st. So a week from tomorrow, that's it. So if you've been waiting till the last minute, it is here. I wanted to tell you a little bit about Maria W. Faust also. This contest is dedicated to her memory. She died in 2011, and that inspired Ted Hollins, her husband's muse. He had never written a poem before she died, but he says he woke up in the middle of the night, the day she died, and a poem came to him. And for the last 11 years, he's written every day. He's written multiple poems every day, thousands of them. He's working on a book right now to bring them together as another way to honor Maria's memory. But the reason we do this thing is we want other people to be inspired to find their muse. So it's more than a contest for us. It's about sharing Maria's love for literature and the arts, and encouraging other people like Ted not finding his muse till he was, in his 70s. We want everybody to know it's never too late to find that. We're also celebrating in 2022, the 10th year of this being the Maria W. Faust Sonnet Contest. Ted has generously set up a trust, and we have money to expand what we do. So we're looking at other ways to expand how we do presentations and things beyond the contest. So that information will be going up on the website soon. So we hope everybody will stay with us for that. I wanted, we have to thank Ted Holland for generously supporting the contest, and our judges, 3 of whom are here today. Jim Armstrong is on the road, but Jim Armstrong, Ken McCullough, if you want to raise your hand when I say your name, Ken McCullough, Emilio DeGrazia, and Leslie Schultz are our judges. We work in partnership with the Great River Shakespeare Festival, and also appreciate River Arts Alliance, who is our fiscal sponsor, and Johanna Ruprecht is especially helpful with this. She's helping me with events like this, and I greatly, greatly appreciate that. Tonight, we are delighted to present Turn and Turnabout, Contemporary Sonnets with Melissa Range. And because our contest is particularly interested in the evolution of the sonnet form and how it lives on in today's world, we are really excited to share Melissa's present expertise on this subject. In addition to being a poet, author, and the recipient of many awards, I'm sure you read about that when you were reading about this presentation. Melissa teaches creative writing and American literature at Lawrence University in Wisconsin. And we've been chatting for a few minutes. I'm so excited to meet her because we're both Southern girls, and I don't get to hear that Southern accent very often. And we're also a little crazy because we live in Minnesota and Wisconsin as Southern girls. So not too many of us up here. So everyone, I hope you will please welcome Melissa Range.
Heidi, you're cracking me up, especially since it's like, it was 59 in my house the other day and I had to turn my heat back on. I was so disappointed.
So I did. So did
but I was like, once it gets under 60, I can't deal with that. I can't deal with 59 in the house. Thank you all so much for coming to this. So basically, I'll give you a little bit of overview of how this will go. I hope this will be fun and informal, and we're going to talk about some poems that I think are really awesome. So I've got 3 contemporary sonnets by 2 poets. So one poet, 2 poems by her, and then another poet, 1 poem by him. And I figure we'll spend 10 to 15 minutes talking about each sonnet and talking about what we notice. Since y'all are sonneteers, that you're going to notice so much, and I'm so excited to hear from you. And then, we'll have some time to, write a little bit, and we may or may not have time to share from that, but we'll just see what happens. And so if you just came in, I'll just tell you my one little piece of Zoom housekeeping is I'm about to share my screen with you. And when I do that, I'll only see like 3 or 4 of your pictures on the side. So if you want to jump in and ask a question or say something, there's a little button called reactions on the bottom of the Zoom screen, and you click it and you see something called raise hand, and I'm going to click it right now. And so you can see that my little hand here is raised. And when you do that, you will come up to the top of my little screen and I'll see you. So if you want to say something, then please, if you can, remember to do that, so I'll make sure that I see you. And then you have to lower it manually, like so. So I'm gonna share my screen with y'all. And now I've got to do my little slideshow here. Oh, give subtitles a try. Definitely don't want to do that. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to read and discuss 3 contemporary sonnets that play with the form in small and big ways, and then we're going to try some of these poets' tricks. So have any of you read this poet before? You maybe have. She's pretty famous. She was our poet laureate a few years ago, and I absolutely love her. I think she is one of the best poets around, Natasha Trethewey. And so we're going to actually look at 2 of her poems. And if you've read her book, Native Guard, then you will have read these poems already. And so that's cool. So what I want you to think about is I'll be asking for a volunteer to read the first poem out loud. So think about if you want that to be you. And then I want you to think about, as you hear the poem, kind of, like general stuff, like what do you notice about the poem by the way it looks, the shape of it? What do you notice about the poem as far as what it sounds like? And then especially think about, where is she doing what you do expect her to do in a sonnet? And where is she doing what you don't expect her to do? And what is meaningful about both of those things? So it's meaningful when she follows the rules, and it's also meaningful when she breaks the rules. That's what I think. So I'll be interested to kind of hear your take on that. So I'm just going to go right into it here. And this first poem is her poem, Southern History. And I would love a volunteer to read this for us. So if you want that to be you, then use a little raise hand thing and unmute, and you can go for it. Now, I know y'all don't need to be shy. All right, Scott, thanks. But I think you're muted.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you.
I'm not usually shy. and I wanted to say hello to those people here that I know. There are a couple, even former student in here, Michael. So I love this book. It's one of my favorite books, and I love her take on different forms. So here's Southern History. Before the war, they were happy, he said, quoting our textbook. This was senior year history class. The slaves were clothed, fed, and better off under a master's care. I watched the words blur on the page. No one raised a hand, disagreed, not even me. It was late. We still had reconstruction to cover before the test, and luckily, 3 hours of watching Gone with the Wind. History, the teacher said, of the Old South, a true account of how things were back then. On screen, a slave stood big as life, big mouth, bucked eyes, our textbook's grinning proof. A lie my teacher guarded. Silent, so did I.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Can I start with a question for you, Scott, since you read this? And I know you know this poem, but I might ask you, when you read this, what did you especially notice? Whether you heard something interesting, or you saw something interesting, or just something unexpected that really stuck out to you?
Well, one thing that's clearly, I mean, obvious right from the start are the quotes that are in italics throughout the piece. And, you know, that's just really, really obvious. And it's also a little odd that, you know, it's arranged in couplets.
Yes.
Yeah. Which most sonnets are not.
Exactly.
Unless you're writing a couplet sonnet, but
yeah. So, you know, I guess I could open this up to, you know, everyone, this question. You know, what do you notice about how the rhyme is working kind of, you know, in combination with the way that the poem is spaced? You know, so we have, you know, maybe y'all can, somebody can tell me what is the rhyme scheme? What kind of sonnet is this? And then how is the spacing kind of in tension with that? Whoever wants to, and just use that little raise hand thing so I see you. Yeah, Leslie.
I had to figure out how to raise my hand, and now I can't remember the question. How the rhyme scheme flows with the 2-line stanzas and what kind of a sonnet it was. Well, Shakespearean sonnet with an A, B, all the way down to GG, rhyme scheme. And I think it's interesting. I mean, anytime I see a couplet, I'm thinking of a dichotomy between, you know, student and teacher, then and now, whatever. But I think the effect this sonnet has for me with this arrangement is that it's disguising really the rhyme from me until I heard it. I heard Scott read it. Then it really popped out. So.
Yes, I 100% agree with you. So when I have taught this book many times because I love this book and I teach it to my students at every opportunity. We actually, this book is actually on our first year studies curriculum at Lawrence where I teach. And so we've been teaching it to all of our first year students for the last 8 years. And so I've taught this book a lot. And students always say this, just what you said, you know, if they'll read it on the page, but a lot of undergraduate students aren't necessarily in the habit of reading poetry out loud, especially in their first year of college. They're just not used to doing that. And when I ask one of them to read it out loud, the whole class is like, oh, wait, that poem rhymes, you know, so they hear it before they see it. And I agree with you that she's muting the rhyme. And, you know, so we could think about what's going on there, you know, why is there this kind of muting of the rhyme, which comes through the spacing? I think there's also, you know, some interesting enjambment going on. There's some kind of slant rhyme going on, and all of that kind of muffles it a little bit. And I would love to hear some other reactions about, you know, kind of just what y'all think about how the sonnet is working in this different kind of form. So let me know. What do you think? There's definitely no wrong answer. If you want, I can ask a more specific question.
Melissa, this is Barbara. Can you hear me? I've unmuted.
Yeah, I can hear you, Barbara. I can't see you, but I'll start scrolling down and looking.
Oh, okay. And so I have figured out where the raise your hand app was in, you know, poem where one of the lines is no one raised a hand, but
right.
The rhymes are nicely veiled in this poem. They don't just stick out as obvious, though, you know, on a rereading of the poem, you can appreciate the technical skill of the choice of words. And as you pointed out, you know, the enjambment so that you just continue reading uninterrupted, but there really are some brilliant rhymes way of thinking.
Barbara, while I have you here, do you have any rhymes that you really think are either really cool or really meaningful or interesting?
Gone with the Wind, a book and a movie I grew up with in Atlanta, Georgia. Wind, and Back Then is a very telling pair of lines. And then Big Mouth and South, we think of that joke about mouth of the South, where I come from. But those are just really, really well used, I think, here.
I also think that South Mouth rhyme is really interesting, because I also think about, when I think about the larger context of this book, and for those of you who have read this book, you know that part of what she's grappling with in this book is being a biracial woman from Mississippi and trying to say, well, I'm also Southern. It's not just white people who are Southern, I'm Southern too. And so I just think about how, to me, this poem is so much about the speaker's silence, like knowing what is wrong and knowing that a racist thing is happening in class, and
just staying quiet about it. Yeah.
Yeah, not even me. And the silence of the speaker. And so, I think about, if you've ever heard Natasha Trethewey read, she's got a big Southern accent too. Of course she does, because she grew up in Mississippi. And so, but here her own Southern mouth is she's silencing herself. So to me, that rhyme is so great, because it has so many layers, that go with not just this poem, but the whole rest of the book. So thank you for pointing that out. And I guess I would ask anybody else if y'all have, if you all have other moments in the poem, especially the rhymes, that you think are interesting. We could continue to kind of have a little talk about rhyme. And so I will just try to scroll down, because it seems like, so if you can use the raised hand function, great. If you can't, I'll just scroll down. So Emilio, did I see your hand? And we got to unmute yourself though. Let's see. It's a little microphone that says mute, and you just click on it.
Okay, am I audible now?
Yeah, you're great.
Okay, I would just say that on reading it, the rhymes were so muted. I thought I was almost reading something fairly prosaic, and it's only on looking back at it that I saw the rhymes. In part because they were separated by couplets the way on the page. But what struck me is that the muted rhymes create a hard impact in the final couplet, lie and I. I think there's a real punch that comes with that strong rhyme at the end after a kind of soft body, as it were.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I think that lie and I rhyme is so good. It seems so telling to me, where, this idea that the I speaker is also involved in this lie, even though she knows it's a lie, and maybe the teacher doesn't understand that it's a lie, and maybe the rest of the class doesn't get it either, but she does. And yet she's complicit in it because of her silence. So wonderful. I think that's a wonderful way to think about how that couplet works. So thank you. Does anybody else have just anything at all they want to say about this poem, on any subject, whether it's the rhyme or where you think the turn might be? Yeah, Leslie.
I just wanted to comment that the language is plain in some ways, but you can tell that there's, excuse me, a lot of care taken with the sound of the language, in addition to the rhymes. And there's a little internal rhyme sometimes, like before the war, sounds like that. But I had a question.
Yeah. In
the last stanza, first 3 syllables of the couplet, I don't know what bucked eyes are.
Well, I think that's open to interpretation, but I'm thinking about, scenes from Gone with the Wind, And I'm thinking about
Very large eyes.
that's what I think. So it's kind of
Okay.
eyes that are like very wide is how
Okay.
that's how I see that based on my knowledge of the movie and like some of the actors in the movie. So that's what I would say that means. But
Thank you.
yeah. So I'm gonna just quickly scroll down my little sidebar here. So if anybody else has anything that you want to say, I would say go ahead and just unmute and I'll figure out where you are.
I'll jump in.
All right.
It says Beyond Baroque, but it's Greg Bell.
Okay.
I noticed that the veiling of the rhymes really aids the poem for the impact that killer couplet at the end, but also that what would normally be the quatrains, separating them as couplets creates a certain kind of dissonance, I think.
Yeah.
In each, what would be the quatrain, there is almost point counterpoint by a building, a very deft building of the mise en scène. All right, she's not even making an argument. It's very quiet, but that's it's like flipping a coin in each quatrain, which I find intriguing.
Yeah, thank you. I love that description. That's fantastic. And I love also how y'all have noticed, just things about her, the sounds being muted, the form kind of creating this dissonance, and also just, the diction being somewhat plain, yet also very powerful and very sonic, even though it is plain. And so I want us to look at a different poem by Trethewey. Yes, sorry, Leslie.
Just before you leave this poem,
Sure.
You asked the question, where does the turn come?
Oh, yeah.
And I guess I can see several places. Really,
Okay.
the silent "so did I" almost could be the turn, but also, on screen, back then on screen, or after grinning proof. I mean, I could see several candidates for the turn, but I'd like to know what you think.
I always think, to me, okay, I don't know, because I could also see it in different places, but I tend to read it as a line break. My teacher guarded silence, so did I. Because I think that does kind of give you, the effect of a final couplet. So it's kind of like that little pow at the end of an English sonnet. I always think about the end of an English sonnet. To me, feels like I just blew up a balloon for like 3 quatrains, and then the final couplet I pop it with a pin, and that's what an English sonnet feels like to me. So that's where I think it might come. But Trethewey is very tricky with her turns and her sonnets, because she also has a lot of unrhymed sonnets in multiple books. She really likes an unrhymed sonnet, and it can be very hard sometimes to find the turn. Yeah, Michael?
Yeah, I think it's amazing that he's quoting from the teacher's quoting from a textbook. Back before the war, they were happy, he said, quoting our textbook.
Yeah.
What's systematic racism?
Right.
That's incredible that anybody would call a statement like that history. That's mind-boggling.
Yeah, and I love that she was writing about this, in 2006, based on her experience, in high school, in Atlanta in the 70s. So she's really drawing on her personal history, and she's also, I think this book does such a great job. I think this book really, at least for poets, it like pushes the conversation forward. Like now people, are like, oh, monuments, racist textbooks, Confederate monuments, and all things like that. It's like, this is part of a national conversation. But when she was writing these poems, she was really at the front of that. So thank you for pointing that out.
And you have to wonder what the textbook will have to say about Reconstruction. That's That's going to be a real interesting chapter too, I'm sure.
Right, right. Well, thank you. Now, let's see. Ken, did you have your hand up? Did you change your mind?
Yeah, yes.
Well, go for it.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
This is one very small thing about pronunciation that when I hear the poem with a Southern accent, wind and then come through as a rhyme. Otherwise, if a Wisconsinite were reading it aloud, it wouldn't be there.
Right. So it might sound more like a slant rhyme, whereas to me, it might sound more like a true rhyme. That totally makes sense to me. Great. Thank you. Well, anybody else before we move on to a second poem by Natasha Trethewey? Yeah, Scott?
Yeah, I wanted to point out something that I noticed in reading it is how often she has lines that break from the iambic pentameter so that the stress is on the very first word of the line, bucked, history, raised, quoting, and I think that also helps break up the form of the sonnet.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Trethewey does not often write in meter, although I feel like the last 4 lines of the poem are pretty iambic, but the rest of it really isn't. And so that is another way that she kind of mutes the effect. That's a great observation. Well, all right. I'm gonna move on to the next poem, and I would love to get a volunteer to read this poem. Hold on a second. Here we go. There we go. This is also by Natasha Trethewey, and this is also from Native Garden. So can I get a volunteer?
Oh, I guess I could.
Thank you.
Graveyard Blues. It rained the whole time we were laying her down, rained from church to grave when we put her down. The suck of mud at our feet was a hollow sound. When the preacher called out, I held up my hand. When he called for a witness, I raised my hand. Death stops the body's work, the soul's a journeyman. The sun came out when I turned to walk away, glared down on me as I turned and walked away. My back to my mother, leaving her where she lay. The road going home was pocked with holes, that home-going road's always full of holes. Though we slow down, time's wheel still rolls. I wander now among names of the dead. My mother's name, stone pillow for my head.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think I can, this is Rosemary, right?
Yes.
Okay, the way my screen is, it's not, I can kind of barely see the name at the bottom of your screen. Well, Rosemary, thank you for reading that so beautifully. And I want to ask you, what did you think about this poem as a sonnet? What do you think about it?
I wouldn't think of it as a sonnet if I reading it the first time, because of the 3 + 3 + 3 and so on. And of course, the rhyme scheme is sort of out of place because you have 2 + 1, 2 identical, virtually identical, and then this all rhymed.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's I wouldn't have thought of it that way until I read it 2 or 3 times, I think. Certainly, certainly the couplet at the end would be the first giveaway.
Yeah, and I mean, really, it's kind of the giveaway because, so thank you so much for that. I would love to get some other reactions. Michael, is your hand up from before, or have you got something for this one too?
No, sorry, that was I didn't lower my hand. I'm sorry.
But if you have something to share, or whoever, you know, and if it's easier just to unmute, if you would rather do that, don't worry about the raise hand thing. I'll figure out who's talking. I would just love some more reactions to this before I kind of talk about what she's doing with the form here.
I want to jump in
yeah.
then.
Go for it.
I love it. The tercets with the repetition of the first line of each tercet gives a sort of incantational quality, liturgical quality. I've never seen this done. And, you know, hats off.
Yeah.
Once again, it's a killer final couplet. And I find also the repetition is it's, like I said, incantational, but kind of hypnotic as well.
Yeah.
Well, Melissa?
Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, does Trethewey ever sing this, or has it been set to music? Because it certainly has a, you know, a blues dirge kind of feeling.
Right.
Yes. You're onto something, Rosemary. So I don't think Trethewey sings this. I actually know of a class at my school that set this to music. It just as a class. It wasn't my class. I wish it was my class, but they were amazing. So I'm going to actually go to my next slide and show you what this is. So Trethewey calls this a blues sonnet. And so as far as I know, she invented this form. I have seen other people write these. I have tried to write one myself. I have never been able to write one that I liked. It's really hard. So basically she takes a blues poem format, which comes from a blues song, and then she turns it into a sonnet. And so this is a lot of text. Feel free to read it. I'm not going to read through all of this, but I'm just going to say, so a blues poem comes from a blues song. Blues poems, as far as literature written down, originated with people like Langston Hughes and Sterling Brown in the early part of the 20th century. And so they were trying to kind of create a literary version of a folk form. And so a traditional blues stanza rhymes AAA. And each line, you'll see here, each line has a particular function. So the statement puts forth the situation or problem, which, problems, resolutions is part of a sonnet, so it's kind of a different take on that. So that's line 1 of the tercet is the statement. Line 2 is the variation. In a traditional blues song, it would be almost identical to the first line. You'll see Trethewey, we'll go back to her poem in a second. She changes it up a little bit more to give it some variety, but there'll be a little twist. And then the alternative, that's the last line of the tercet, and it's often an ironic or humorous or dark, I would say even more devastating comment upon the first 2 lines. And you can see her doing that, in her tercets. And then, there's a little bit of extra information, just like, most blues poems and songs feature end-stop lines. There's not a lot of enjambment. There's each typically self-contained. But then where she does do that innovation, turning it into a sonnet, is having that last stanza be a couplet instead of 3 lines. And so then we have to be like, oh, is this also a turn that comes toward the end? Where would we say the turn is? And I'll go back to the poem. This whole thing is being recorded. So if you're like, wait, I want to learn more about this blues sonnet, it'll be in the recording. And you can also, like, if you Google blues sonnet, you'll find lots of pages that give you all the rules. But if we go back and look at Graveyard Blues, now that you kind of see that she's got this hybrid form going on, how does that kind of make you respond to this? And how do you, if you think about this as, well, does this feel like a sonnet? Like, I've definitely had students that are like, I don't really like this as a sonnet. I think this is just like a blues poem that, is missing a line. And I'm like, well, whatever you want to think, that's fine. To me, it does feel very sonnety, but I wonder what y'all think. Yes, Greg, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay,
Little song.
yes,
That's
yes,
my
nice.
little song.
What was it?
That's great. That's great. What about some of the rest of y'all? You know, does this feel like, so I like to think of this as like a super extra sonnet. You know, it's like it's got more rhymes than you would expect. And it's got, you know, it's not just a sonnet, but it's also got another form mashed in there. So I just wonder, I don't know, what do y'all think about that? You like it? You don't like it?
Oh,
Yeah, Scott.
Yeah, I really like it. I don't see that it's, I mean, I get the repeating as in a blues form, but it's not that different from some of the things that Frost was doing with his tercet rhymes
Yeah,
in you know, like Acquainted with the Night.
nice.
So you know, I just think it's a little kind of a variation on that. And why not?
Right, right. Why not? I do think, you know, so for example, one thing you could think about is if you really like writing a villanelle, and I really like writing a villanelle, or yeah, I mean, I really do. I love them. If you really like writing repeating forms, it could be fun. You know, you like repeating forms, you like sonnets. This could be a really fun thing to try to just kind of bring that together and see what happens. Yeah. Other comments, other thoughts.
There's one comment.
Yeah.
Who's up?
I can't tell. I'm just scrolling down to see who's talking.
Okay, this is maybe an odd observation, but if Emily Dickinson were capable of writing blues, she might write something like this.
I see that.
Mhm.
That's super interesting. I love
Yeah.
that. Leslie.
I just wanted, yeah, thanks. Just wanted to say it does work for me, and I'm going to look at this, you know, again later. But I think one reason it works for me is not just the musicality of it, but the way each of the tercets has a focus. Rain, preacher, witness, sun, road, and then the pillow, kind of sleeping, death, you know. And I agree with Ken completely about Dickinson. The poem of hers that, you know, because I could not stop for death, totally echoes that for me. This is really, yeah, very interesting.
It is, and thank you for you know, pointing out that, you know, because each stanza is so self-contained, even though they're tercets, it's kind of like, well, you can imagine it though as a quatrain. You know, I mean, it's not a quatrain, but that kind of focus, you know, and we're moving through quatrain by quatrain in a, you know, typical sonnet, and here we're moving tercet by tercet, but the idea is kind of deepening as we go, and then we've got that little shift at the end. That's really great, and I love the Dickinson thought. That's really awesome, y'all. Well, just I'm looking at time, and I want to make sure we have a chance to look at our last poem. So I will go ahead and go here a couple slides more, and I want to tell you about. So do you know this poet, Tyehimba Jess? He won the Pulitzer Prize in 2017. So basically, I'm just bringing you some Pulitzer Prize winners tonight. So Treadaway won the Pulitzer Prize in 2007 for Native Guard. Could be wrong about that. Could be 6. And Tyehimba Jess won in 2017 for his book Olio, which I really recommend. It is a wild book. If you like to see somebody experiment with form and also work with history and also work with like the archive, it's super cool what he does. And so there's some historical stuff to know about this next poem, but what I want to do is actually just read it first, and then we'll kind of get into kind of some of the history behind it. And so I would love a volunteer to read this poem, and don't freak out when you see this poem.
Can you make it bigger?
Read it however you want. I don't think I can. It was very hard to find this at all. I had to kind of go all over the internet. So it's a little bit tricky. I don't know if I can make it bigger. Yeah. Because you can imagine, I don't think I could actually reproduce that. I don't think I could figure out how to type that.
I can't make it out.
Oh, y'all really just can't see it at all?
Well, we see lines.
You can see it, you just can't read it.
Okay. All right.
There you go.
Is there somebody who can see this well enough to read it who wouldn't mind to volunteer?
I'll give it a shot.
Thank you.
Millie and Christine McCoy. We've mended two songs into one dark skin. We ride the wake of each other's rhythm, bleeding soprano into contralto, beating our hearts' syncopated tempo. We're fused in blood and body from one thrummed stem, budding twin blooms of song. We're a doubled rose descended from raw carnage of the South with a music all our own. With our mouths bursting open our freedom, we sing past rage, seeped in the glow of hand-me-down courage, grown from hard labor that made our mothers shout. Spent with awe, we hymn to pay soft homage to the work song's aria. It leaves us drenched in spiritual acapellas, soaked in history like our father's sweat, flowing soul from bone through skin. We pay debts born of and beyond the flesh. We are just two women singing truths we can't forget. From plantation to grave, Lord, here we are. From broken chattel to circus stars, freed twin sisters who hauled our voices far. We sing straight from this nation's barbed-wired heart.
Awesome. That was great. I'm sorry that it's hard to see. Can I ask you, Ken, how did you decide how you were going to read this?
I guess just by the way it's set up on the page. I mean, for one thing, I think you probably, if you're good at sight reading, you pick up immediately what he's going to be doing. So I guess I didn't find it that hard to read it aloud.
Okay, thank you.
Melissa, if you click on that thing at the top that says use slideshow,
Yeah.
try that.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh,
Ooh,
where were
Makes
you
a
when I
huge
was
difference.
teaching on
magic.
Zoom? That's amazing. Thank you so much. Now, yeah, no, that's really good. Wow. Okay, that changed my life. Changed everybody else's life too. Great. Okay, so does anybody see any other ways this poem could be read? And this is not a trick question. This is like, so there's a TED Talk out there with Tyamba Jess about these poems. And he shows that there's more than one way you can read the poem.
Yeah.
You could read it.
So
You could
Scott,
could read it.
Two different voices, the
Yeah.
left side and the right side, which are the two merged sisters.
okay, amazing.
and together.
And together.
Yeah.
Right, which was great, which is what Ken did. And so Scott, do you want to if you want to unmute and share?
Yeah, well, you could read it one side and the other side, and then the places that come together would be sort of shared choruses. You could have two people read it simultaneously, I suppose, and that would be an interesting thing to try to process. But yeah, so it's an open-ended form, obviously.
Yeah. So so Tayimba Jess, he reads it down this side. And so basically, like, this one side is supposed to be Millie's voice. And we'll talk about who Millie and Christine McCoy are in a second for anyone who doesn't know them. So here's like line 1 and 2, and then here's 3 and 4. And then we go down this side, and that's one way to read it. Then you can go down this side, and that's a second way to read it. And then you can go across, which is the way Ken read it, which is the third way to read it. And also, I didn't even know this, but when I saw Tayimba Jess give this TED Talk, he says you can also read it from the bottom to the top on both sides. And you can also read it diagonally on both sides, which is absolutely crazy. And I'm just like, thank goodness you won the Pulitzer Prize, because if they're not going to give it to you for doing this, I don't know who's ever going to get it. Like, that's so crazy. But I love this. He calls this a syncopated sonnet. And so we'll come back to this in just one second. We'll come right back to the poem, but I want to make sure that we talk about Millie and Christine McCoy. Some of y'all may already know about them. They were two conjoined twins. They were Pygopicus twins. They were conjoined at the pelvis. They were born enslaved in 1851.
When they were born, they were together.
Yeah, that's right. And they were together their whole lives. And so after emancipation, so basically while they were enslaved, they were subjected to, various enslavers making money off of them, exhibiting them at circuses. They could sing really well, making money off them that way, subjecting them to these awful medical tests. But after emancipation, they became very famous singers, and they did really well for themselves. And they bought their former enslavers' land and gave it to their parents. And their motto was, "As God decreed, we agreed." And they did not feel pity for themselves, and they felt like this was God's gift to them, was to, kind of have this sisterly physical bond and also the bond of music. And so Tayimba Jess, the poet, was just really inspired by their story, and wanted to create a form to kind of show, show them and their story. And so he says, and so here's just a definition. A syncopated sonnet has multiple voices and can be read in multiple ways. And I really do recommend, if you just Google Tayimba Jess TED Talk, it's about 10 minutes long, and you will see him read one of these Millie Christine McCoy poems in every possible way, and it's so wild and awesome. And he says, in reading this poem, you can go whichever direction you want to go with your eyes, tracing across the bottom of the poem in the same way that the Gawker's eye traced across the body of the McCoy twins, except in this instance, you're taking the story of the McCoy twins and you're getting involved in their story and not just looking at their body. So I just thought that was a very brilliant way to kind of approach telling their story through form, and a really wild thing to do with the sonnet. So I want to look at the poem again and just basically ask y'all, what do you think about this? What do you think about trying this? But also, are there any instances of, because he's rhyming so much all over the place, so it will work in all these different ways? Did you see anything super interesting as far as the way the rhymes are working or the way the form is working?
Not so much about the way the rhymes are working, but to me, when you look at the poem on the page, before you even hear a word or see a word, you're already thinking separation and joining, separation and joining. It's just looking at it puts you in that frame of mind.
Yes, I agree. That's great. That's super great.
I want to jump in and say, whoever suggested that you have two people read it, that is breathtaking. It's a great idea.
Yeah, I love
what
that.
I was reading.
And then both reading in unison, what would be essentially a kind of refrain. The line, the three couplets going down the middle, reading together. I'd love to see that done.
Yeah, Yeah, you definitely give me a really good idea for when I teach this book again. You know, maybe asking my students to try that.
Yes.
Yeah, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, what I noticed right from the start was that what looked like the first two lines, which are in 4 little sections, really is a quatrain. You've got A, B there, skin, contralto, rhythm, tempo. And you have the same thing with the next section like that. South, rage, mouth, courage.
Yep.
A slant rhymes there. Same thing with us, sweat, Capella's debt. So there is this kind of a little bit of adhesion to the sonnet form, and then all this stuff in them, it just goes all over. It's pretty amazing.
It really is. And you know, if you like other kinds of forms, if you read this book, Olio, he does crazy stuff with guzzles and all kinds of other interesting forms. So it's not just sonnets. He just goes wild. Leslie, did I see your hand before?
I did have my hand up. I'm not sure it's real coherent, but I have a question and a comment. I mean, it clearly is intended to have a concrete poetry element. It reminds me a little bit of, you know, the George Herbert, a little bit like that.
Totally.
But is it a double sonnet, do you think, Melissa, or is it one attenuated sonnet, or why call it a sonnet? I'm just curious about that. I mean, I do see I do see a blueprint or an echo of the sonnet form, but I guess if it were up to me, I'm not sure I would call it a sonnet, or that it needs to be called a sonnet to be a fabulous form unto itself. So, you know, but I just saw it the first time 2 seconds ago, so.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that, you know, it doesn't need to be called a sonnet to be amazing, but I see it, you know, I'm just kind of like, okay, skin, contralto, stem, rose, if I'm reading it down one side, south, rage, shout, homage, and he's slant rhyming. Us, sweat, just forget, are, far. Whoa, let me go back. Oh, come on, PowerPoint. Let me try again. Okay, let's share the screen again. Okay. So I got a little trigger happy there. And then the same thing over here. So rhythm, tempo, stem, rose, mouths, courage, shout, homage, Capella's debts, just forget, stars, heart, you know. So again, some of those are pretty slant rhymey. But you know, and that's just two ways to read it, but it does feel like a sonnet to me. And then the way they can read it straight across definitely is a sonnet. It's just really a sonnet packed with a lot of extras. So for me, I say yes, but it also, if you say no, I'm just kind of like, that's fine, you know, because it is very experimental. It's very experimental.
Well, Melissa,
I'm just saying question mark. I'm not saying no.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Amelia, what do you say?
Yeah, I guess I would echo Leslie's question. You know, when you're one of 4 judges for a big sonnet contest,
right?
A big question becomes what is a sonnet? And I guess, and it's complicated by wonderful poems like this, which I think are intriguing. It also reminds me of George Herbert's The Altar, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's complicated by, I think, loose talk about what a sonnet is. Diane Seuss, whose book called Sonnet just won the Pulitzer Prize, and she was an honorable mention winner for the Society of Midland Authors book, and I think deservedly so. I think it's a fascinating book. And when I read it, I found lines literally going around the page. In other words, the lines were so long, you had to turn the page
Yeah.
to read the rest of the line. So I guess my question is, when is a sonnet not a sonnet? What
Right.
makes a sonnet a sonnet? And this is part really of a much larger question, which I don't think we can answer tonight. When is a poem not a poem?
Right. Right. And then there's always a prose poem, kind of like come in.
If we're in a sense going to think of anything that has 14 lines as a sonnet, we're opening ourselves up, it seems to me, to a very loose definition of a sonnet. I just wonder if the sorts of sinuosities, sound sinuosities that we see in this poem and in some of the others are really the essential ingredients of a sonnet, as well as thematic concerns, obviously. But I guess I'm troubled by the loose language that poets use, and that is inflicted on the public, really.
It's funny because I love that Diane Seuss book, but if she hadn't called it Frank Sonnets, I would have just been like, yeah, these are probably experimental sonnets because they've got 14 lines. But I agree, the lines are super long, but that's not why I like the book. Why I like the book is her imagery and her voice and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I also think, I mean, poets just do their thing. Like I would never write like a long lined poem that didn't rhyme and call it a sonnet, but that's just because I like to rhyme. I think there are a lot of poets, and I think that they really want to engage with this tradition, but they're kind of put off by rhyming, and they're afraid to try it or whatever, but they still want to kind of get in there. And so I feel like they should try, and if that's the way that they come to it, then that's great. And maybe they will get deeper into the tradition later. They might not. But
I'm not arguing for tradition here. I'm arguing for the elements of structure, in a sense, and the elements of definition. I'm not saying we should all go back and write ABBA, whatever, and make sure that everybody insists on that before we call it a sonnet. Although in our contest, we have to draw lines somewhere.
Right.
Because we have gotten some really weird stuff that's called itself sonnets. And we have had discussions about it. And I'm not sure the discussions are over.
Well,
no, it's
Melissa? Oh, excuse me.
No, go ahead.
Probably everybody has noticed this, but at the end, there are really two couplets, one on one side, one on the other.
Yeah.
And they're using the same rhymes. So it really feels like a sonnet to me, but a doubled sonnet.
Yeah, it's definitely doubled. That's a great observation. Janet?
I just wanted to comment. I was busy looking at my phone to try to find this because I had this memory that because people were commenting about different ways that this could be read. Back in 2020, the Lannan Foundation had a wonderful presentation up in Santa Fe where they had Tayamba Jess there with a composer named Janice Lowe. And they presented a song cycle of duets using these poems about Millie and Christine. And it was just the most amazing presentation I've ever seen. And people could probably check on it. I can't see it from here on my phone, but normally Lannan Foundation does have their events recorded. And so people might be able to find it online, but it was the most astonishing presentation I've ever seen.
That is a great tip. Thank you so much.
I'd like to follow up on that. one thing, this has to do with the performance of the poem. I remember I was teaching a class and I was doing a segment on some early 20th century stuff. And I'm trying to think whose work we were working on. It was very opaque and the students weren't getting it. But finally, one of the students took the work and who wrote Four Saints and Three Acts?
Gertrude Stein.
Gertrude Stein took Four Saints and Three Acts and performed it so that there were, sometimes random things happening. And in the randomness of it, a lot of it was pretty amazing. Things read over each other or, that weren't next to be heard to each other. And I think that something like that is going on here. And one other comment, this has to do with the South. The quote, the original Siamese twins were from Mount Airy, North Carolina. And I can't remember their names, but they were quite famous and they got married, which, seems like a pretty odd arrangement. They had separate wives. It was two guys, but there yet has to be a song cycle written about them too.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one thing that that Time Bajess really teaches me is that, if you're interested in something historical, just go in there and research it and then see what you can do with it as a poet, and I think one thing I love about Jess and Trethewey is that they're really unafraid to explore history. And I really like that. So that's why you got these sonnets instead of other ones, because they write about subjects that I think are super interesting. And also in ways that I think are really intriguing and, potentially fun to try. Does anybody have any other just kind of parting thoughts on the Time Bajess poem? I know we're at time, so what I might do is just after we have a few more comments, I'll just kind of check in and see if you want to do any writing or if you just want to call it a night. But first, any last comments on this poem?
I wonder how long it took him to write this.
Oh my gosh. Well, so he published his first book in 2004, and he published this book in 2016. So I think it probably took him at least 12 years, I imagine. Olio is a really long book. There's a lot of archival research, so that's another reason that I think it took him a long time, but it's really a tour de force. I really recommend it if you're interested in kind of seeing somebody just virtuosic display of thinking and writing and just all over the place. Yeah, Barbara.
Yeah, so I just wanted to leave you all with a thought, because I've grappled with this question of what is a sonnet, and if you play with the form, does that count? As Heidi probably knows from our discussion in the sonnet contest last year, but when I'm struggling to see what a particular poet is trying to communicate, I just remember, something that I've taught my students before, that a poem is a puzzle in the frame of its own making. So you have to interpret the poem through what is the frame that the maker is offering up here, used to say, and Jess, seems to be both making the concrete poem here, like the Herbert a poem that was referenced earlier, that looks like the conjoined twins, that looks like these two bodies, where you might say, is this person, born in this frame of making one human, or is this two humans? And these are probably questions that he's trying to get us to look at in interpreting this poem. And I think that, the most engaging and amazing poems are the ones that invite us to do that. So it's been great that you've given us this combination of poems, Melissa. They've been wonderful to think about.
Well, I just gave you some poems I like, so I'm glad that you're finding them interesting. So thank you. Anybody else?
I just want to say one more thing about, and it's not so much about this poem as it is about poetry contests. If I were submitting to a sonnet contest and I had written this, I probably would not submit it to it because I wouldn't expect the judges would look kindly upon it. I would go with something a little more traditional, and maybe that's just a fault of my own, that I feel like, if it doesn't look and feel enough like a sonnet, no one else is going to see it that way, especially somebody who's judging a sonnet. So, and I don't know if others feel that way too.
And can I say a few words about that?
Sure.
It is definitely something we struggle with because I get a lot of questions about crown sonnets, and a contest has to be in a framework. I mean, kind of like the sonnet itself. But I'm excited that we can kind of do events like this that get us outside of that box so that we can discover more expanded things that might not really match the contest format, but we can have these great discussions. This poem, this is just kind of blowing my mind. It's just the most interesting thing I've seen in a long time. So, hopefully we'll keep doing more things like this that allow us that flexibility to explore more than that. Maybe the judges have other things to say about that.
We appreciate it. This has been a really fascinating evening. Thank you, Heidi and Melissa.
It's been wonderful.
Yeah, well, thank you all. And I will also say my next plug for reading Olio is that he also has more traditional sonnets in the book too. So he has some like this, and then he has some that are just kind of like more recognizable as a straight up sonnet. So it's interesting to see him kind of do both, and like any poet, just, having the versatility to try all kinds of new things. When I write a sonnet, I use a lot of slant rhyme, I use a lot of enjambment, but I'm still very much working in that kind of nice little room, of the sonnet. And because I like that look, and I like the compactness of it, but I also think this is really cool. So it's fun to see what people are doing. Well, okay, so I will just say, we may not have time for this, but I just want to let y'all know that if we had time, this could be something fun just to try for yourself, whether it ends up being something for a contest or not. But I would just call this, inspired by all three poems, try something extra. So just for fun sometime, see what happens if you use white space and enjambment to kind of disrupt the way the sonnet looks. Mash up another form with the sonnet and see what happens. Use an extra speaker and try to write a syncopated sonnet. Now that seems impossible, but I've actually had undergraduate students do this successfully. Like they have written them, and I don't know how they did it, because to me it looks really impossible. But I think, with enough kind of determination, one could give it a try. So it could just be something fun to do. But I want to thank y'all so much for coming to this. And everything is recorded. So if there's, if you want to revisit any of the poems or any of the definitions or the prompts, then you can. And I just thank you all so much for such an awesome discussion. I really love talking about sonnets. They're my favorite form. And I love talking about sonnets with a group of people that know so much about them, and is so rewarding. So thank y'all so much.
Could I ask you a personal question?
Yeah.
Okay. You say, "Hit was give to me."
Yeah.
The old people's way of talking. And what I'm wondering is, in hearing that way of talking, is that kind of what connected you with medieval subjects?
I think I was interested in medieval subjects. Now we're talking about my poetry, y'all. Sorry if you're just like, what? Where are we going here? This is like from back when I was reading at Winona. I think I was interested in medieval subjects already before I learned about kind of the linguistic connection. Just because I really like medieval illuminated manuscripts, and I also really like Old English poetry. So I think I was already interested in it. That was just another little layer.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I just want to, I just want to say that what I appreciate about your work is your sense of place and how that is so very important. Because I think now identities are in the foreground and place seems to be in the background. I think place is very important.
I think place is important too. And that's why, you know, one thing I love so much about Trethewey is that she is really showing that identity and place are really, you know, wrapped up in each other. And they are for every single person. You know, where you're from and where you live makes you who you are. And so that's one thing I love about Native Guard, is that she's really exploring that. And I think Diane Seuss is doing that too in that Frank book. You know, she's really thinking a lot about where she grew up in Michigan. So yeah, so I like that too. I always tell my students, I would love it if I knew where your poem was happening. So yeah, so thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Could you say a word about syncopation? I'm as a musician, I am, know what that is, but what are the differences here?
Well, now I'm going off Time Bajess's own definition. So this may not be very satisfactory to a musician. But what he's saying is, it's basically, I think what he's saying is like, a voice comes in, a voice comes in, a voice comes in at a place that feels maybe kind of offbeat for what you would expect for a sonnet, is what I imagine. And so it's coming in a different place. So like the rhymes are doubling up, things like that are happening. But he's really defining it as just a sonnet that has multiple voices and that can be read in multiple directions. And so what he means by that, I'm not quite sure.
Melissa, the simple definition in music is just an accent on an unaccented beat. So I would think that would track perfectly with poetry.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Well, all right. I thank y'all again. I really appreciate y'all coming out. This is such an awesome crowd, and I'm really happy that since I wasn't able to actually give, I had some COVID exposure when I was in Winona, so we decided I should not come, and I think that was a good decision. So I'm really happy that y'all. I did not have COVID, by the way, but I was a very close contact. So I was really happy that we could reschedule and I could get to be with y'all. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We were able to reach an audience outside of Winona, so this was wonderful.
I know, right?
This was really good. So,
well, thank y'all again.